Welcome back to part 2. Another way to think about introductions is to imagine the introduction as a funnel that draws all kinds of readers in with a very broad appeal at the beginning and then brings them to a place of interest and understanding to a very narrow thesis. We start with something that will get the reader's attention, that broad appeal, any of the methods discussed in part 1, or something else entirely. Maybe you come up with a different approach. But the idea is to raise the topic, get people thinking about it, and then we show how the topic is relevant to the reader or to the reader's society. We point out that it's controversial, or it's at least something that people will either disagree about or that they just fail to think about the issue at all. So it's worth talking about and discussing. That's the main thing. And then that leads us to the thesis, which is the writer's main argument. So get the attention, show how it's relevant to the reader, show why it's worth talking about, what's the controversy, and end with a statement of the thesis. Let's look at an introduction from this funneling perspective and see if we can pick it apart and see where it's doing each of these arcs strategies. Here in this paragraph, go ahead and pause the video for a minute and just read through what we have here, and then we'll discuss it together. All right, we've seen the first 2 sentences of this paragraph already in part 1, but here we're going to break the paragraph down into the 4 parts that we've just discussed. The first sentence states the obvious, raises the topic, gets us thinking, gets our attention. In the next sentence, the more that very stylistic, nicely worded sentence, it shows how it's relevant to the reader. Our laws and institutions, manners and mores, movies and television shows, it shows us that relevance. And then we get a couple of sentences here talking about why it's worth discussing. What's the controversy? People assume something, but that's not the case. So there's 2 sides, what you assume and what is true. And finally, in the 4th section, we get the author's statement of belief. Divorce has become a way of life only as a result of recent and revolutionary change. Let's take a look at another one. Here we have, this is a introduction very different from the ones we've just discussed, but I really like the way this introduction begins. Short, choppy sentences that communicate the author's frustration with all the negative ways that she's portrayed. It starts off kind of like a drumbeat. So I'll let you read through this here in a moment. This paragraph continues on a second slide. All right, let's go ahead and pick it apart. As you've probably guessed, the very first few sentences, that drumbeat, that's our attention getter. Probably it made you want to continue reading. It certainly did for me. It gets you hooked. By stating all the negative things about the author, it makes you as a reader want to find out what she is like. If she's not all of this, what is she? Next, we have a section, the green part here, that broadens it out to all the Black people that she knows, and then to all of Black America. So yes, her story up here is very limited, only relevant to a few people, but then she broadens it out to a larger group, and then finally to a very large group, all of Black America. The next section, here in the blue, tells us where the disagreement comes in. Where's the controversy? What are the 2 sides? She's already told us what she thinks. This is not who we are. But here she shows us what kinds of people are saying that is who she is what Black America is, and it's the media. So the 2 sides are her and the people she knows and the news media. And finally, in the purple section here, we get her thesis. Now this is a longer thesis, it's broken up into 2 sentences, but it does express her main idea, which is that media coverage of Black America is one-sided and negative. So as you can see, The introduction takes a lot of crafting, a lot of attention. Oftentimes, writers will choose to write their introduction and their conclusion last after the rest of the essay is done, because then they know exactly what it is they're introducing. That's what I often do. If you write the intro without knowing quite what you're going to say in the essay, you might end up having to rewrite it later anyway. If the thesis or the position of your paper changes, or if you think after you've written it, I want to introduce this to the reader in a different way than what I originally thought. One brief word about introductions to narratives. Many narratives don't have formal introductions. They just go right into the action of the story. Maybe they describe the setting like, when I was 12, I lived, in Parma, Idaho, and I thought it was the most boring town in the entire United States, or something like that. But some narratives do have introductions that follow the format that we've discussed. The intro from part 1 about the man who has lymphoma is an example of what that might look like. You sort of go through the same process for an intro for a persuasive essay, but for your thesis, instead of stating an argumentative point, a persuasive point, you state the main realization or change that your narrative portrays. So, for example, a thesis for a story about a 12-year-old might be, at the age of 12, I found out for myself that you should be careful what you wish for. And then that sort of hints at what the story is going to be about, hints at the main point, or, states the main point, but then it doesn't give anything away. We go on to read the story to find out what was it, what happened that made this person decide you should be careful what you wish for. This video is continued in part 3.